A mechanism operating inside the standard American bank account reduces household purchasing power consistently over time without appearing anywhere on the account statement. It is not a maintenance fee, an overdraft charge, or the interest rate on any outstanding debt. It produces no alert and no line item. Because the account balance at the end of each year is nominally higher than it was at the beginning, most households never calculate what this cost is actually worth in dollar terms annually. This video identifies that cost, breaks it down by component using a specific median household example, and outlines the steps available to address each part. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the median liquid savings for a middle-income American household is approximately $41,000. That money is held almost universally in one of two instruments: a checking account or a standard savings account. Both carry federal deposit insurance. Both are broadly regarded as safe. And both are subject to a recurring real cost that most households have not specifically quantified. The cost persists primarily because it is not visible in the conventional sense. The balance grows modestly each quarter. Interest is credited. The account appears to be functioning as designed. The erosion occurs not through any deduction or charge, but through the gap between the yield the account provides and the rate at which purchasing power is removed by inflation. The real rate of return on a savings account is the difference between its nominal interest rate and the prevailing inflation rate. The FDIC reports the national average interest rate on standard savings accounts at 0.46% annually as of 2024. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports average annual inflation over the past decade at approximately 3.8%, with the rate peaking above 8% between 2021 and 2023. The highest level recorded since 1981. The resulting real rate of return on a standard savings account under average inflation conditions is approximately negative 3.34% per year. Applied to a $41,000 balance, that represents a real loss of approximately $1,369 in purchasing power annually, with no withdrawal required and no charge issued. For reference, the AEAA reported the average total annual cost of car ownership in 2022 at $10,728. The annual purchasing power loss on a median household savings balance approaches that figure, without any of the corresponding utility and without any monthly statement line to make the cost apparent. The mechanism operates through 5 distinct components, each with its own countermeasure. The first is the yield gap. At the national average of 0.46%, a standard savings account returns considerably less than the 3.8% that inflation removes from the same dollars over the same period. The gap of 3.34 percentage points represents the annual real cost of holding savings in this instrument. On a $41,000 balance, that gap costs approximately $1,369 in real purchasing power each year. The direct countermeasure is an account substitution. Federally insured high-yield savings accounts at online institutions, including Ally Bank, Marcus by Goldman Sachs, and Discover Bank, are currently offering rates between 4.5 and 5.0% as of mid-2024. These accounts carry identical FDIC insurance, no lockup periods, and no minimum balance requirements at most institutions. Transferring $41,000 from a 0.46% account to one yielding 4.8% increases annual interest income from approximately $189 to approximately $1,968. The transfer process typically takes under 10 minutes through an online application. The second component is compounding erosion. The yield gap does not produce a fixed annual loss in isolation. it compounds on a progressively smaller real base year over year. The same compounding mechanics that amplify investment gains operate in reverse on real losses. A 3.34% annual real loss does not subtract a constant dollar figure from the account's purchasing power each year. It subtracts 3.34% of a shrinking real base on a nominally growing balance. The statement reflects growth. The real position deteriorates at an accelerating rate. Over 10 years, $41,000 in a standard savings account at 0.46% accumulates nominally to approximately $42,924. Adjusted for 3.8% average annual inflation, the real purchasing power of that balance is approximately $28,700 in today's dollars. The nominal gain on the statement is $1,924. The actual decline in purchasing power over the same period is approximately $12,300. Inflation-adjusted savings calculators available through Bankrate and NerdWallet allow this calculation to be applied to any specific account balance without cost. The third component is the purchasing power illusion. A savings account balance that is higher at year-end than at the start of the year registers as a positive outcome by every visible measure. Interest was credited. The balance grew. Nothing on the statement indicates a problem. The real return figure, the actual change in purchasing power, is not reported, displayed, or flagged by the institution. The account operates precisely as designed. The design simply does not include a real return disclosure. Maintaining a savings account remains appropriate for liquid reserves, funds that must be accessible immediately without exposure to market fluctuation. The issue is not the existence of a savings account, but the allocation of balances that exceed genuine liquidity needs to an instrument yielding below inflation, when federally insured alternatives at higher yields are available for the same purpose. The fourth component is the inflation mismatch on essential expenditures. The Consumer Price Index measures a broad basket of goods and services and functions as a reasonable general indicator. It consistently underweights the spending categories most significant to middle-income household budgets. Bureau of Labor Statistics data shows housing costs increasing at an average annual rate of approximately 4.2% over the past 20 years. Healthcare costs growing at approximately 5% annually, and higher education costs rising at roughly 6% per year. Each of those rates exceeds the headline CPI figure, and each exceeds the yield on a standard savings account by a wider margin than the general inflation gap indicates. For a household with primary cost exposure in housing, healthcare, or education, the effective real rate of return on a standard savings account is not negative 3.34%. Depending on the household's specific cost mix, it is closer to negative 4.5 to 5.5%. On a $41,000 balance, that range represents between $1,845 and $2,255 in real purchasing power lost annually. Calculating a personal inflation rate weighted toward actual year-over-year cost changes in the household's primary expense categories rather than the headline CPI produces a more accurate measure of the true erosion rate. The fifth component is behavioral lock-in. Behavioral economics research on status quo bias consistently documents that the default option, the one requiring no action, is the one most people retain indefinitely, including when superior alternatives are readily available. In the context of savings accounts, the default is to leave money where it is. Changing accounts requires a decision, an application, and a transfer. Without a visible loss signal on the statement, the conditions that would prompt that decision do not arise naturally. This persistence is not attributable to financial carelessness. The loss is structurally invisible by the nature of how deposit accounts report their performance. The statement shows nominal gains. No communication from the institution conveys the real return figure. The account performs normally by every displayed metric. The information required to identify the cost is simply not where most people would encounter it in the course of routine account management. It is common in financial work, including among those whose professional responsibilities involve return calculations daily, to hold cash balances in standard accounts longer than is financially optimal, not for lack of access to alternatives, but for lack of having applied the specific calculation that makes the cost measurable. Running the calculation changes the decision. That is its primary function. Placing all 5 components into a single comparison. 2 households, both age 32, both beginning with $41,000 in savings, both contributing $500 per month consistently. Income and savings discipline are identical. The only difference is allocation. The first household retains the full balance in a standard savings account at 0.46%. By age 52, their nominal balance is approximately $204,000. Adjusted for 3.8% average annual inflation, the real purchasing power of that balance is roughly $102,000 in current dollar terms. The second household allocates $15,000, approximately 6 months of essential expenses, to a high-yield savings account at 4.8% and directs the remaining $26,000 plus the $500 monthly contribution into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. The S&P 500 has returned approximately 10% annually in nominal terms since 1957, using 7% as the real return assumption after inflation, the more conservative and widely cited long-run figure, and noting that this projection assumes continued long-run market performance consistent with historical averages, which cannot be guaranteed. By age 52, the second household's position is approximately $497,000 nominally, representing roughly $248,000 in real purchasing power. The difference of approximately $146,000 in real purchasing power between the two outcomes was produced entirely by the choice of where to hold existing savings. Income, savings rate, and time horizon were identical across both cases. The countermeasures, summarized, open a high-yield savings account at a federally insured institution. Ally Bank, Marcus by Goldman Sachs, and Discover Bank are currently in the 4.5 to 5.0% range, and transfer the liquid reserve portion of existing savings. Separate savings into 2 categories: 3 to 6 months of essential expenses in the high-yield account, and everything above that threshold directed toward instruments with returns above inflation. Calculate the real rate of return on every savings account currently held by subtracting a personal inflation rate from the account yield. If the result is negative, that account is reducing purchasing power annually. Open a brokerage account at Fidelity, Vanguard, or Schwab. Each offers 0 minimum accounts with index fund expense ratios as low as 0.03%, and begin directing non-liquidity savings accordingly. Set a recurring annual calendar reminder to verify that the high-yield savings rate remains competitive relative to other federally insured alternatives as rates shift across institutions over time. The next video in this series examines the second most significant source of silent wealth erosion, one that operates specifically inside retirement accounts that most households have not reviewed for fee exposure or allocation efficiency.